doing a job properly.
I wouldn't call the Spanish enterprising. I wouldn't say they did the job properly.
To begin with, on some level, they'd put together ocean-going galleons before.
Sure, but maybe I'm taking a different approach to the tone of the word enterprising.
Yeah,
rapacious, pillaging.
Well, they're sort of at least mildly capable.
Sure,
right? Because some people, some nations, sort of just aren't really capable.
So was Timur the Lame, but I wouldn't call him enterprising.
Okay, fair enough.
The Mongols were very capable, but I wouldn't say they were enterprising.
But even like the Italians, why is it places like Genoa or Venice or Porto or Portugal? Why is it places like this or the Dutch or the English that were able to go round the world rather than, why not Croatians or Turks or people from North Africa?
I am actually
build boats.
I'm a very staunch geographic determinist in this regard, right? And I put it down to literally how these places are constituted, because all of the things that you've just mentioned there have basically the same properties. They are a small part of land on a coast. And so they don't have a vast hinterland of population to draw from, like, say, the French or the Spanish or, the Turks or whoever. They don't have subject populations that they have to deal with. They've got, in fact, big, scary neighbors that they have to deal with. And they have access to the sea. Like, this is a lifeline. This is a way of freedom to the open world, to be able to get the resources of the world to come to you. You didn't have to control the Silk Road, for example. You could literally bring boatloads of whatever. And so I think it's literally because of the geography of the places, having a big scary neighbor and having a lot of access to the sea and a small land mass and a densely populated area. I think it's all that.
Yeah, quite possibly. I'm sure it's at the very least, that's a massive part of it.
Yeah.
Right. There'll be a number of things, like the way reality is. It's just a matrix of different things.
Yeah, but I think also having the big, powerful neighbor is an important motivator there. With Portugal at Spain, with the Dutch, it's France and Germany. With the other city-states of Italy, it's France and Germany. I think this is a big part of it.
But you could still ask the question: why is it places like in the Balkans or across North Africa or any of West Africa? Why not them?
Thomas Sowell goes into great detail about this.
Right, yeah. Perhaps that's a story for another time.
Yeah, it is a story for another time. But population density and lack of navigable rivers and a poor coastline, actually. One of the things that people forget about the Mediterranean is it's a really, really long coastline throughout the Mediterranean. It's really, there's like coast everywhere. And whereas Africa is just this one continuous sort of flat plain. And so that doesn't lead itself to the sort of nipping across, if you like the Adriatic Sea or something, right? It's a long walk around or it's a short journey across. Whereas in Africa, you've got to go inside the land. You can't, all you're doing is going up and down a coast rather than actually reaching resources. But anyway, it's the shape of the coastline is often put down to, again, I hate to be a geographic determinist about it, but I really think there's a lot of merit in it.
Also a much more immeasurably lower IQ, but perhaps there's something different.
Sure.
I mean,
that's true.
Why the Dutch? This idea of building shipyards and doing things properly, having the right tool for the right job, finishing what you start,
but
having an imagination. Why can't we do? What's stopping us from doing this? And then you do it. You get it done. But you've got a solid work ethic.
Conversely, you've got the Arabs who, the average Arab doesn't have a massively high IQ, actually. But they are an enterprising people. Because of, I think it's the geographic location. They've got a lot of access to the sea. They're on particular sea lanes, and they've got good access to places like, the east coast of Africa and India and the Mediterranean, and therefore they become a very competent seafaring people as well. So I'm actually genuinely hesitant to be like, look, they're just stupid. I don't think it's just that. I think it's about incentives as well. Right? 'Cause even stupid people will follow incentives.
Why is it Captain Cook got to Australia before any Arab? Why's that?
I don't know. You tell me.
Well, because
I mean, the arrows went pretty far.
I think it's this idea of having an imagination and a solid work ethic. That there's no stopping us. There's no, the Dutch were like, we can do this. We can design and build better ships, and we're just going to work really hard at doing it.
But I mean, maybe it was because of necessity, really. Because I mean, if you're in the stormy, cold North Sea, then maybe you're thinking, okay, I need a certain kind of vessel. Whereas if you're an Arab who's got dhows and they're perfectly capable of getting to Indonesia and back by going along the Indian coast, then why would you need?
Why is it Englishmen and Dutchmen that were first to Easter Island rather than the Chinamen?
Oh, well, actually, that was down to an emperor, wasn't it? There was a particular Chinese emperor who had a massive fleet.
So a reflection of their politics.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah, in a way.
Right,
yeah, I mean, absolutely. It would be a reflection of their politics. So as far as I'm aware, there was a Chinese emperor who had a massive fleet. And he wanted to go east to see if there was anything there. But he died, and then his successor was just like, no, I'm not bothering with that. And so the Chinese fleet just kind of languished in its own seas. So
they had the whole of human history there. That's just one emperor. Or not even the Chinese, the Japanese, or any number of Indians. Why weren't Indian sailors, why didn't they reach the west coast of America? I mean...
Jared Diamond puts this down to Europe being a multiplicity of powerful states. I mean, in Japan and China, you've got like Japan, China, and Korea, right? They're like the three states that are in this area. It's like, okay, but they all control like good resource-rich lands. But if you're the Dutch, you don't control good resource-rich land. You control a tiny amount of land with lots of major powers around you, and this is constant, and you're constantly at war with these powers, then maybe you will do this, And so the sort of cauldron of Europe is because of geography allows for many nation states to exist. Whereas if you look at somewhere like China or Japan, geography doesn't really allow that.
I think you also need a solid work ethic, an imagination, and a big set of balls.
But again, and
if you haven't got all of those, it's not going to happen.
But I think the terrain itself selects for those things. I mean, one of the things, I've read many accounts of people who've gone to Africa, and they just say, well, look, essentially, it's a very resource-abundant place. Like, all year round, it's warm. All year round, there's fruit. Like, there's always game in the bush, right? You don't have that luxury in Europe. You have to have a solid work ethic. If you don't store up winter food during the summer, you starve. You can't live here. And so it necessitates the kind of character. And I do think there's something to it.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, there's a multitude of reasons. But anyway, that's a story for another time.
But I'm not saying that IQ isn't an issue. I'm not saying that IQ isn't a factor.
I think imagination's a big one.
Yeah.
And balls as well.
Yeah. Political freedom is also an interesting
I'm not saying
aspect.
Anybody from sub-Saharan Africa or the whole of China and Japan haven't got balls.
No.
I'm saying they never just thought, they never had that magic combination of a great work ethic. It's just a number of things. I'm saying the same thing again.
Quick aside there, I think political freedom genuinely is important because one of the things that the Protestant world had was a really, like, and if you think about it, historically, it's a really peculiar obsession with property rights. Like, actually, in most of the world, people don't think of property rights in the kind of monomaniacal way that the Protestant world views property rights, right? Like, honestly, all of like Enlightenment thought from the English perspective revolves around property. Like in Italy and in Spain, they're thinking of transcendental orderings of the cosmos, right? And we're like, yeah, but what about my farm? What about the thing I own, right? And this leads to a certain level of political freedom where if I go and trade with that, I expect to be the beneficiary of what I've got. I don't have everything isn't just controlled by the Sultan or by the Emperor or whatever. And this level of political freedom promotes initiative. Like, why shouldn't I go over there? And this is why we see, like, essentially all of these the Northwestern European empires begin not as like royal decrees, but as private initiative. Oh, there's a landmass over there, is there? I'm going to put a newspaper ad. 100 men needed to go to the New World. Promise of death. Low risk of survival. Glory. And then men would sign up and go and do it. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't happen in China, right? because you don't have those kind of political guarantees. And just, I think there's, like you said, there's a huge collection of reasons, but I think all of these are like valid things that contribute to why Northwestern Europe was basically a cauldron prepared for this kind of thing after coming out of the Middle Ages. It was like a confluence of different things all came together.
Well, the Dutch certainly were among the first to. Well, they, like I say, they were in the ascendancy in the early 17th century. Spanish and the Portuguese had started to wane, or certainly plateaued, let's say.
Yeah.
And the Dutch, well, their merchant navy was the biggest in the world, sort of easily. Sort of France, England, Spain, Portugal put together. More, I think, even the Dutch. So they were really sort of the best around in terms of a merchant navy. In terms of military vessels, they were still among the best, but Britain rivaled them, arguably was already ever so slightly better.
Again, it's England at this point.
We had, did I say Britain again?
Yeah.
Sorry, England. Yeah. And we had...
I don't want the Scots getting any.
We had... Although, if I'm talking about Oliver Cromwell days, he has smashed the Scots.
Fair.
But yeah, it's England.
Yeah.
Like our largest warship was bigger than anything the Dutch had. But in terms of numbers, they're about the same. One of the things the Dutch had... a lot of their ships had quite a shallow draft,
right.
Because they had quite shallow waters that they had to build their ships in. So they weren't necessarily the best ocean-going ships. Like we had a few deep water ports, like Plymouth and Portsmouth and stuff. So we could design and build some ships that were a bit better ocean goers, but that meant in shallow waters they were less manoeuvrable, so probably slightly less better at engagements in shallow waters. So anyway, our design of ships were a bit different, but our military navies were sort of on a par here. It is, we're nowhere near the undisputed masters of the sea in any way at this point. So under Oliver Cromwell, our relationship with the Dutch had begun to sour, because where we'd always been sort of staunch allies with them against Spain. And Oliver Cromwell wanted to have, or did, in fact, have wars with Spain. We would be sort of natural allies. But our relationship soured a bit because just a number of things. So, for example, when they got independence, they sort of stopped being such a staunch, sort of, like a de facto ally against the Spanish. They were like, we need to settle down for a few years here, or a few decades, or a few generations even if we can. We need to sort of stabilise ourselves. We've just been at war with Spain for 80 years. What more do you want from us, guys? Sort of thing. Yeah, give us a chance to breathe. Give us a chance to sort of really take off here. And also in the world, there was tension between our overseas territories. So, for example, in Indonesia, there was sort of a small massacre, Dutchmen killing Englishmen in Indonesia over just over holdings and economic and trading rights and things like that. So while something like that isn't enough to just start a war in and of itself, it isn't forgotten. And back in those days, countries would be quicker to go to war with each other. Now, for example, the idea that, say, England and France might go to war over the dinghy people, because nukes are on the line, it's not.
Yeah.
Whereas back then, something really small could be like, right, we're at war now, we're going to war over that. Like something really quite small sometimes.
I'm reminded of the War of Jenkins' ear.
Right. Right.
A guy got his ear cut off and that was it. War, which, don't get me wrong, I don't disagree. But I think that's a great example of what you're talking about, right?
They could be quite blasé about war, and you could come to terms and end a war quite easily as well.
Yeah.
Like now, especially when we're used to the examples of World War I and World War II, it's like, well, if we do go to war, it's going to be a bitter thing to the very end. Well, it doesn't have to. It didn't have to be like that.
There's this interesting modern view of the sort of sanctity of the nation state. Any of your territory is all of your territory, essentially, is the way it looked at. Whereas in this period of time, it wasn't that. The Dutch control these islands. Okay, well, we can take them off them as a part of a peace settlement. They'll cede these to us, and that's totally normal. But that's just not what happens in the modern era. This is what's going on in Ukraine and Russia at the moment. Like these two majority Russian oblasts. It's like, why not? If I were Ukraine, I would have just been like, okay, we'll just cede them to Russia. I mean, I don't, and I'm just being a pragmatist. I'm not saying either good or bad either way. But in previous eras, that's what would have happened. And that would have been a negotiating position that the Ukrainians would have taken. But now it's all or nothing. Oh, no, the entire country's on the line. It's like, okay.
We're quite used to the idea of a total war.
Yeah.
If you go to war, well, might well be a total war.
Yeah.
Well,
that's not how it was.
Yeah, in the Middle Ages or before, or even in like the 17th century, it doesn't have to be that at all.
Yeah. The king's got a fleet. He'll go out and fight, and if it loses, then he'll cede some territory somewhere else, and then that's the end of the war. Like you didn't know about it,
Especially if you've got a monarch, he could be quite sort of capricious and just on a whim decide, oh well, let's have peace then, like that one day, just like, oh, I'm bored with the war now. Let's just have a peace.
Yeah,
stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's very different to us, where it's like, no, we have to we have to take all your bases now.
Yeah,
otherwise it's not a real war or something, or so. Yeah. The very concept of war was different back then.
The scale of it was also just much smaller, wasn't it? It's like 10, 20,000 men was a massive battle back then. Now it's hundreds of thousands. And just the amount of material involved in a war, it's just so much greater now. And so it's like, right, okay. We've got to remember, like, communication was so much worse as well. It took so much longer to get things done and to get messages across and things like this. And so, it's a totally different world.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.